How's your heart today? Sometimes, when we say we miss someone, what we really mean is that we miss who we were beside them. The version of us that laughed faster, spoke softer, stayed longer at the dinner table, or felt less guarded in ordinary rooms. Tonight is for anyone who has realized that some goodbyes do not only take a person, they also take a certain rhythm from our life, and a certain voice from inside us. The first letter comes from someone who thought she was only missing home. It. I thought I missed my mother's old kitchen. That was the story I told myself every time I took the long way home and passed our old apartment building after work. I said I missed the narrow hallway, the cheap plastic rice container, the sound of the pressure cooker, the way the afternoon light hit the sink. All of that was true, but it was not the deepest truth. My parents moved last year. It was the right decision. My father's knees had started complaining about the stairs, and my mother wanted a place with better light and a smaller kitchen that was easier to clean. No one fought. No one cried. We packed cups into newspaper, argued over old extension cords, and laughed at how many soy sauce packets my mother had kept for no reason. Still, on the last evening before they handed over the keys, my chest felt wrong in a way I could not explain. The apartment looked half erased already. The photo frames were down, the corner shelf was empty, the refrigerator had only eggs, a bottle of water, and one container of kimchi left inside. My mother was standing in the kitchen making soup in a pot that looked too familiar to be packed away. I said, "You could have just ordered dinner." She shrugged and said, "Last night here, it should smell like us." I sat on the counter while she cooked, the way I used to when I was 15 and dramatic about school, or 23 and dramatic about work, or 29 and pretending I was no longer dramatic about anything. She handed me a spoon and asked if it needed salt. I tasted it, and for one small second, I was not an adult with deadlines and bills and a phone full of unread messages. I was just her daughter, sitting in the kitchen, expected and known. That was the version of me I did not realize I was about to lose. In that apartment, I never had to arrive polished. My mother could tell whether I had eaten by the way I opened the fridge. She knew I was tired by the sound of my bag hitting the floor. She could ask, "Bad day?" before I had decided whether I was going to admit it. After I moved out years ago, I thought I had simply grown up. I liked paying my own rent. I liked buying the yogurt no one else in the family would touch. I liked silence when I wanted it, but I did not notice that I had also become more edited, more efficient, even around people who loved me. At the new apartment, everything was brighter, cleaner, and more sensible. My mother was happy there. She should have been. But when I visited, I kept waiting for the old ease inside me to return. It didn't. We sat at a proper dining table instead of that tiny kitchen. She asked if I wanted tea, and I said, "No, I'm fine," in the careful voice I use with everybody now. One Sunday, while we were unpacking a box marked kitchen tools, my mother pulled out a chipped bowl and laughed. "You used to eat cold noodles in this after school," she said. I smiled and answered, "I ate everything in that bowl." Then she looked at me a little too gently and said, "You sounded different back then, when you came home, I mean. Less careful." That sentence stayed in me for weeks. Because she was right. Somewhere along the way, I had started visiting my own parents like a tidy guest. I gave summaries instead of confessions. I said work was busy instead of saying I was lonely. I said I was tired instead of saying I did not feel fully inside my own life anymore. That day, before I left, she packed leftovers for me. I took my bag from the chair, and she touched my wrist and said, "You can still come tired, you know." I almost cried right there over a container of soup. That was when I finally understood that I was not grieving a kitchen. I was grieving the daughter version of me who still knew how to arrive without explanation. The version who sat on the counter, stole cucumber slices while dinner was being made, and did not think twice before saying, "Can I stay a little longer?" Now, when I visit, I try to bring her back in small ways. I call before I have arranged my thoughts. I admit when work is heavy. I let my mother see the real shape of my face, not the managed one. The old kitchen is gone. But every now and then, sitting in the new one, I hear my own voice loosen for a second. And I remember this, as some versions of us do not disappear. They just wait for a room where they feel safe enough to return. Host transition. Sometimes we miss a person. Sometimes we miss how unguarded we were in the life that formed around them. Relatable. After the breakup, I did not miss his voice first. I missed my laugh. That sounds strange when I say it out loud, but it is still the truest way I know to describe what happened. Of course I missed him too. I missed the second toothbrush, the extra pair of slippers by the door, the way he always turned off the kitchen light with his elbow because his hands were usually full. But underneath all that was a quieter absence. I missed the version of myself that had become easy around him. We were together for 4 years, and most of those years were ordinary in a good way. We burned toast. We forgot to buy detergent. We watched half a series and never finished it. We folded laundry while talking about people at work we were both tired of hearing about. It was not some huge, cinematic love story. It was a small life built side by side, and that made it harder to see when the warmth began thinning. Toward the end, nothing dramatic happened. We did not betray each other. We just became careful in the wrong places. We sounded kind, but not close. When one of us had a hard day, the other offered solutions too quickly. Our conversations became neat, efficient, respectful in a way that made me feel strangely alone. The night we ended things, there were 2 mugs on the table between us. That is what I remember most. 2 mugs, both half full, both going cold while we said the kind of honest sentences that arrived too late to save anything. After he moved out, I kept waiting for the obvious waves of grief people talk about. Sometimes they came, but what surprised me were the tiny moments that felt sharper than the big ones. The worst one happened in a grocery store. I picked up 2 tomatoes without thinking. Just 2, the way I always had. Then I stood there holding them, and realized I was not only missing him. I was missing the woman who still moved through life as part of a pair. The woman who talked while cooking because someone was there to answer. The woman who bought his favorite snack while pretending she was only getting it because it was on sale. The woman who was not embarrassed by her own small, domestic habits. That night, I made pasta and caught myself saying, "This is better than last time," to an empty kitchen. I stopped with the spoon in my hand and just stood there, not because I was destroyed, not because the breakup had suddenly become tragic, but because I could hear, so clearly, the old version of me speaking into a life that no longer existed. I had been mourning him, yes, but I had also been mourning the self who had once felt easy in my own skin. A few weeks later, I found an old receipt inside a cookbook. On the back, in his handwriting, he had written, "Buy lemons, green onions, and whatever snack makes you less dramatic after work." I laughed so hard I had to sit on the floor. It was such a small thing, a stupid note on a receipt. But there I was again for a moment, the version of me who would have rolled her eyes, sent him a photo of it, and still come home with the overpriced chips. That was the part I had not understood before. A love does not only make us attached to another person. Sometimes it introduces us to a self we had never been before. With him, at my best, I was more playful, less rehearsed. I wore ugly pajamas without apology. I danced while waiting for the microwave. I told long stories badly. I let myself be ordinary without trying to make ordinary look impressive. When that relationship ended, I thought all of that had left with him. It took me months to understand that it had not. He helped bring that version of me forward, yes. Being received gently can do that. Being known in daily life can do that. But she was still mine. I had simply forgotten how to reach her without witness. So I started small. I played music while making dinner, even if no one heard it. I left voice notes for friends, instead of trimming everything into neat texts. I bought flowers for the table because I liked walking into a room that looked lived in. I laughed at bad television shows without feeling silly for laughing alone. One evening, months later, the kettle started rattling too loudly while I was trying to think, and I said, out loud, "Not now." Then I laughed, a real laugh, quick and familiar. I stood in that kitchen and realized I was coming back. Not as the exact same woman. Life does not return us unopened. But as someone who could still be warm in a room by herself. Someone who could still be unedited, even without a partner. Someone who finally understood that missing him and missing myself had been tied together for a while. I did love him, but I was also grieving the self who had once felt simple inside love. And healing, for me, was learning that I could become familiar to myself again. Post-transition, some people do not just leave an empty space. They leave behind a question. Can I still be that version of myself on my own? Relatable. The self I miss most belongs to a friendship. Not a dramatic friendship. Not the kind that ends with betrayal or silence so sharp it changes the room. Ours just softened under distance, adult schedules, and time zones. She moved away for work. I changed jobs twice. Calls turned into voice notes. Voice notes turned into reactions. Life kept moving, and nothing terrible happened. That almost made it sadder. In our 20s, we lived together for 2 years in a small apartment with terrible curtains and one frying pan that should have been replaced much sooner. She was the kind of person who knocked on my bedroom door at 10 at night and asked, "Walk?" like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. And somehow, with her, it was. I was different in those years. Lighter, I think. Looser in the shoulders. More willing to let an evening become something unplanned. We ate convenience store fruit on the floor because the table was covered in unopened mail. We took late walks for no real reason. We made tea and then forgot to drink it because the conversation had become too good. With her, ordinary life felt shared in real time. Not organized afterward. Not reported neatly. Lived. That is the version of myself I miss when I think of her. Not younger in some glamorous way, just less managed. Now I have a stable life, a decent job, matching containers with proper lids, a calendar with reminders for things I once trusted myself to remember naturally. I am not unhappy, but sometimes, especially on Sunday evenings, I miss the self who heard keys in the hallway and knew the night was about to become a conversation. Last year I went back to the neighborhood where we used to live. I had an hour before meeting someone for dinner, so I walked past our old street. The cafe where we once shared one slice of cake because payday was 3 days away had become brighter and more expensive. The laundromat was gone. The convenience store was still there. I stood outside our old building feeling a little ridiculous. Nothing big happened. No revelation. No cinematic moment. Just a strange, quiet understanding that I had outlived a version of my own life, and that I had not let myself grieve it properly. What I missed was not only her. It was the self who used to speak mid-thought because she knew she would be understood. The self who dressed for grocery runs like they might turn into adventures. The self who believed an ordinary Tuesday still had room to surprise her. A few months later, she sent me a voice message while walking home in the rain. She was laughing because she had once again bought the wrong kind of rice, something she used to do constantly when we lived together. I played the message twice, then a third time. There it was. Her laugh, and the old rhythm of me waking up around it. I wanted to say something meaningful, something elegant enough to cover all those years. Instead I typed, "You still sound like home." She replied, "You do too. Just busier." Busier. That word comforted me more than she probably meant it to. Not lost. Not ruined. Not too changed to recognize. Just busier. Since then, when I miss that version of myself, I try not to turn the feeling into proof that life is flatter now. I try to treat it as information, a reminder of what helps me feel most alive inside my own days. So sometimes I leave the dishes until morning. Sometimes I say yes to a late walk. Sometimes I call a friend before I know what I want to say. Sometimes I buy fruit for the walk home instead of saving it for later, like a very organized person. These are small things, but small things built that old self in the first place. I used to think I was only missing my friend. But what I was really missing was the version of me who let life interrupt her in beautiful ways. And maybe she is not gone at all. Maybe she is just waiting for me to make a little more room. Host closing. If you have been missing someone lately, maybe part of what aches is the self you only knew beside them. The daughter who spoke more freely. The partner who laughed more easily. The friend version of you who did not make every evening so efficient. That does not make your sadness any less real. It only makes it more honest. And maybe the gentle work now is not to become exactly who you were, but to carry the best of that self forward into the life you have now.